Hey guys, Greg Benz here. In this video, you'll learn how to use custom luminosity masks in order to help separate this relatively white and bright temple from this relatively white and bright sky behind it. This image comes courtesy of photographer Neil Williams, who's a Lumenzia user, and was asking me how can he use Lumenzia in order to lighten this temple. So I'm going to show the complete edit I would do on an image like this. To begin with, I want to get rid of these dust spots in the sky because if we bake them into the luminosity masks, it might create more work later, so it's better to remove them early in the process. So I'm going to click on Check Dust, which is going to give us these red layers to give a visualization, as well as this blank layer where we can do the healing and cloning. And we'll just go in, resizing the spot tool, which is selected for us when I clicked on Check Dust, and just go paint right over the problem areas, which to me are kind of three main areas there. These almost looks like a little piece of dust or hair got in there. And we'll just click on Check Dust to cycle through and see if there's anything else. It's looking pretty clean to me. So I'm going to click on the X to remove that visualization and just look from before to after. And you can see how nicely it cleans up the sky with the adjustments we've made. I also want to get rid of this lamp, which of course is not a dust spot. We can do it on the same adjustment layer. Hitting J again for my spot brush. I'm just going to brush right over this thing and come down pretty close to the edge of this building, but just let it kind of stand as if it's a pipe here. I don't need to completely remove it. Just maybe clean up the edges of it a little bit until it looks natural to me. There we go. And then there's a little bit of residual pink here from the flaring of that lamp. That looks pretty good. So I think at this point, we're ready to address Neil's question, which is how can we lighten this building? As is the case always with luminosity masks, they're just revealing something you do to the image. So the question is, how do we want to lighten this? And I think a levels adjustment will do just fine. So I'm going to click for a new levels adjustment layer, open it up, and normally I'd bring the white slider into the edge of the histogram. But the problem is this histogram is for the whole image and it includes this really bright parts of the sky. So I can't use it. Instead though, we can hold down Alt or Option, click on the white slider, and we can see what's blown out. And by bringing that back, we can see roughly where the sky is hitting the edges here in terms of clipping, and then just back things off so the temple is appropriately adjusted. So maybe around like 180 there. You can see I don't have too much white at the edges of the building, and that looks pretty nice there. Things should not be clipping in the temple itself, just in the sky, and we'll get rid of that. So this is going to be the adjustment we use. Now we need to more appropriately target it. When we look before and after, it does a nice job of lightening things. I wouldn't mind if there's even more contrast, and we can darken out some of these shadow areas to make sure they're not lightened by using a targeted mid-tone mask. So let's temporarily turn this off. Click on Zone C to see how that does. And I think just a simple mid-tone selection like this does a nice job of picking up the highlights in the building while blanking out, essentially avoiding changes in the darker area. So it will not lighten the shadows too much. Let's go ahead and click on Mask to load that as our mask on the levels adjustment layer. And now turn it back on. You can see that we have a little bit more contrast than before. The shadows look nicer than they did earlier. We still have the same big problem, which is the sky looks terrible. We don't want that. We also have it spilling into other areas of the image. So let's refine this further down to just the areas of the building here. And we can do that by painting on the layer mask we have now. But to do so means that you can't really undo things if you want to make a change later. So I like to work with group masks. And in this case, I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on Group, which gives us a black group mask. So it hides everything. And now we can paint white to reveal what we want. So hitting B for my brush, so make sure it's relatively soft. It's around 29%. That's great. And just go brush in the areas I want to change. Just doing this freehand. I don't have any selection to help me, but it's going to help guide things as a good starting point to show the adjustments where I want them. And then we can just go remove any remaining distractions that, for example, the sky. The sky is really the problem here. So we're going to have to go and remove that. But I just want to paint this in, make sure things look relatively pretty good across the building here. And I'm going to Alt click on the mask, just fill in the center here, make sure that I don't have any big gaps in the middle. You can always adjust that later, but that right there is starting to look pretty good with the exception of the halo in the sky. We need to remove that. Now to do that, What I want to do is add another group mask, and we'll just black out the areas of the sky that should not be adjusted. So let's go click on group. We get a white mask, and now anything we paint here with black, it will be hidden. So we can remove the sky. We just need a good selection of the sky. Let's temporarily hide this again because it's not going to help us when we have that mixed building sky look there with this adjustment, and go find something like maybe zone E to target highlights. And you can see you get a nice silhouette of the building here. It's quite dark in the sky, but it looks like a pretty good foundation for this adjustment. We need to customize it. Let's go click on the levels adjustment, and I could bring in the white slider. That'll lighten things up a lot, but I don't like having pixels too blown out when they start hitting the edges of the building, because sometimes you can create some little edge effects. Instead, let's bring the gamma slider to the left here, and that brightens things up so that it's looking relatively light along the edges of the building without being quite so blown out. In fact, I'll just take it all the way over to 999 on the gamma, and I think that's looking pretty good as a sky selection. So let's click on cell to load that as a selection. And then I'm going to click once more, since we've done that work, to save it, and I'm just going to call it ZE Sky to remember this is my sky selection. So if I ever need to come back to it, I have it saved. Let's now make this group visible again, and clicking on the group mask, we have our selection active as indicated by the green cell button in Lumenzia. Just hitting X to make black be my foreground paint color. Let's zoom in a bit, B for my brush, and just start to paint here in these areas. You can see the halo is just immediately going away because we're painting right through that selection of the sky. So the only thing I can paint black is areas of sky because that's what the selection is doing for me. And painting black is removing it from the group mask, which means that nothing in the group can show in those areas. So it's removing that halo, and that's looking really good with one exception. I'm noticing here that there's some halo that's kind of resistant to going away. So if we look at our selection, click on check cell, and we'll see the selection did not include those areas because that part of the cloud just happened to be dark enough it was not used. So we can't use this to fix this part of the sky. Let's just hit X to discard that. And we need a different way to select these pixels. We could, of course, paint by hand, but I'd like to keep a nice precise edge around the top of this temple here. So let's once again kind of hide the adjustments we've done. Let's go this time, try something else. Last time we tried zone E, let's try L for the lights. And we need to separate the sky from the rest of the building. Color is one option. The sky is probably more blue. So let's bring up the blues and the cyans. And you can see that creates a little bit better separation. Let's now bring the slider down to create a stronger lights mask. And somewhere there around zone 3, I have a pretty good separation of sky and building. I just want to black these areas out further and maybe lighten these up a little bit more. So let's open up the levels adjustment layer, and let's bring in the black to help protect the building. And let's bring in the white to help ensure that the sky is going to be adjustable. I'm not too worried about some of these little things like the middle of the building here. If I paint that out accidentally, if I have a problem there, that's going to be an easy thing to fix. What I'm much more worried about are the areas of the sky that touch the edges of the building, because that's the part that's hard to paint by hand. So I'm not going to fuss over these little details. Let's go ahead, click on cell to load that as a selection. Let's go make our group visible once again. Clicking on the group mask, B again for my brush. I already have the black paint active. I'm just going to shrink down to a smaller brush size. And now I can paint on these pixels that I previously could not remove. Now I need to brush, let go and brush again because it's a relatively weak selection. So a single brush stroke is not going to get the job done. It just takes some repeated brushing efforts to clean things up here. But you can see how nicely those little dots get cleaned up there. Let's zoom in even further on this area, and you just see how weird and pixelated that looks right now. But in a moment, after multiple brush strokes, we'll be able to clean that up in a really nice way. So just, again, takes a little bit of patience. I could make the selection even stronger, but I'm not too worried about that. I'm just going to keep brushing with what I've got here and just clean things up. And sometimes this is little minutia that just takes a bit of extra effort, but it's worth it. And you notice that the key here was that we did everything on separate layers, so we can always undo this if we made a mistake, but also it took more than one selection. There was no perfect selection of the sky. There was no perfect selection of the building. But by being flexible and using a few different ones to get the job done, now we've got this nice, clean result. It just takes that little bit of extra effort and planning to do that. I'm going to shrink my brush down a little bit here and maybe even increase my flow a little bit further. I usually work with a pretty low flow just because that helps me build things up in a controlled manner. But when the adjustments are coming through at such a slow pace, it helps to just kind of kick things up to a higher flow and get that done. All right, so I think that's looking pretty good. Let's zoom back a little bit, just trace around the building here, and you can see how things look nice and natural. It was just that one area of cloud where we had problems. I'm not worried about other areas of the image because this middle mask, we didn't paint all over the image, just the areas where we needed the adjustments. So that's looking really good. And let's look from before to after how nicely we've lightened up the building there. I'm noticing some areas of the sky look like there's maybe still being adjusted. If I alt click on this mask, I can see there's some gray in the mask. So I didn't do enough work here with the original sky selection. So let's go click on cell and let's go deselect our current selection. We don't need it. Click on cell again. And we've got this zone E sky that we created before. I should have saved the last selection. I forgot to do that, but we should have saved that one we did, which was lights 3 with a little more blue. But let's load this because this will help select these areas of sky. So click on load as selection, and I'm going to alt click so I'm seeing the image. B for my brush, still using black paint here. I'm just going back and spending a little bit more time. I just simply did not do enough adjusting, and this is one of the reasons why in so many of my videos you see me toggle layers off and on, because I'm looking to see what changes in the image. When you make that rapid change, small adjustments, small problems can become a lot more obvious. And so now you don't see that haloing toggling back and forth there, and it's just a much cleaner result. So I think we've got that now. Let's just look before and after. Building is looking really nice. I don't see a residual problem spilling elsewhere. So let's go on to a few other aspects of this image that I'd like to edit. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect, and I want to make the sky more interesting. Let's do that by clicking for an HSL adjustment, opening that up, and I want to target these areas that are somewhat reddish in the sky and see if we can't bring out more of that. So let's go switch over to the reds. I don't know if this is exactly right, but we'll just try and see what we get. So if I take the saturation and increase that, we see that there is some extra color coming out here, but it's in a pretty tightly controlled part of the cloud. The rest of the sky is some other shade here, probably into the magenta. So I can click and drag the left edge here and define this much wider. Now we get the rest of the sky with that bluish look. I think that's looking pretty good. I don't mind the pink colors there. I think it looks nice and soft. And if we bring out the right side and just see if we get more of this orange color, we see that as we're doing that, it's not really improving the sky, but it is adjusting the greenery here. Notice from kind of before and after, the greens are coming out here more in probably the yellow zone here. So let's just bring that in. I don't want to make the vegetation lighter than it is, but I do want to enhance this sunset. And we can see how nicely that does that. Now, as I do that, it's also adding some extra color in the building, and I want to keep that relatively neutral. It doesn't have to be white, because of course the color of the sky will color a white surface, but maybe a little bit less than I have now. And in order to do that, I'm just going to click right on my Zone C levels and drop an HSL adjustment above it, because we can take advantage of the same targeting to perfectly hit the building without hitting the sky. So we'll click on HSL, see it drops it in there, open it up. I'm not even worried about targeting particular colors. Let's just bring the saturation down. You see if we go all the way, we knock the color out. That's too much. Let's just go to a point where there's a little bit of a nice matching color, but just less than there was before. And I think that's pretty close, but just my eyes, it almost looks a little bit green because of the surrounding pinks. So let's bring this up a little bit, maybe around -30 or so, and make that adjustment. And that's just one of these things about color science, is that you're going to see opposite colors. So the perfect numeric color is white, but it doesn't really look white. So we need to leave a little bit of this color in here to make it look correct. So that's looking pretty good. I want to go now and crop and vignette this image. Let's start with a crop because I don't need this much sky and I don't think this far right is contributing to the image. So I'm gonna hit C for the cropping tool and let's just bring the top down to maybe somewhere around here. Let's bring the right side into maybe around here. So getting rid of that green vegetation. I like that composition a bit better than what we had originally there. Just a nice little subtle change that I think strengthens the image. Now I'll hit L for my lasso tool and draw a rough selection on the area that I want to vignette and click on the vignette button in Lumenzia to help darken things down. I'd like to maybe darken this part of the sky even further. So I'm going to select this area. And if you click on the mask, you can hit the delete key and you can see how you remove more there. Just make sure that the background color is the one you want to use. So white is added to this. If I go select here and hit delete, it's going to add white and further hide it because the white on the mask is revealing the vignette. So hit Command D to deselect and just look before and after on the vignette. I think that's looking pretty good. I wouldn't mind feathering it a little bit more than it is. So let's grab the slider in Lumenzia, drag it up to be more general, maybe somewhere around 700-800 pixels there. I think it's a nice soft look. And overall, we've gone from before this relatively flat image with no color, not enough separation of the main subject in the sky, to after where it's much more clearly separated and stands out as a focal point. So that's it from me, guys. Please be sure to comment below, subscribe to this channel, and if you want to learn more about Lumenzia, head to gregbenzphotography.com/Lumenzia.